The morning sun was just starting to peek through the clouds as the Williams family made their way through the busy Atlanta airport. David Williams walked alongside his wife Michelle, both of them carrying small suitcases and wearing the kind of excited smiles that only come before a long-awaited family trip. Their two teenagers, 16-year-old Zoe and 14-year-old Kevin, were practically bouncing with energy as they navigated through the crowds of travelers. This wasn't just any ordinary vacation. They were flying to Los Angeles to celebrate Grandma Williams' 75th birthday, and it had been over 3 years since the whole family had been together in one place. David worked long hours as a manager at a local manufacturing company, and Michelle taught 5th grade at the elementary school where she'd been working for the past 12 years. Money had always been tight, but they'd been saving every extra dollar for months to make this trip happen. "Dad, is it really true that we can see the Hollywood sign from the plane?" Kevin asked, adjusting his backpack straps and looking up at his father with wide eyes. The boy had been reading everything he could find about Los Angeles for weeks, and his enthusiasm was infectious. David chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. "We'll have to wait and see, buddy, but I promise you'll get to see it up close when we're there." Michelle checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes, making sure they were heading to the right gate. She'd been nervous about flying all week, not because she was scared of planes, but because she wanted everything to go perfectly. This was the first real family vacation they'd taken in years, and she'd been planning every detail down to the minute. "Gate B12, right here," she announced, pointing to the sign above them. "We're actually early for once." Zoe, who had been quiet for most of the walk through the airport, suddenly perked up when she saw the massive airplane waiting at their gate. "Mom, that thing is huge. Are you sure it can actually fly?" The family found seats in the waiting area, and David pulled out his phone to text his mother. "On our way, Mom. Can't wait to see you," he typed, adding a heart emoji before sending it. His mother had been talking about this birthday celebration for months, and David knew how much it meant to her to have all her children and grandchildren together. As they waited to board, Kevin pulled out a small notebook where he'd been writing down everything he wanted to do in California. "Okay, so we've got the Hollywood sign, the beach, maybe Disneyland if we have time, and Uncle Tony said he'd take us to see where they film movies." Michelle smiled at her son's excitement. "Don't forget the most important thing, spending time with your grandmother. She's been looking forward to this for so long." "I know, Mom. I wrote that down first," Kevin said, flipping to the first page of his notebook where he'd written Grandma's birthday party. In careful block letters, the boarding announcement came over the intercom, and the family gathered their things. David had managed to get them seats together, which hadn't been easy given how late they'd booked the flight. As they made their way down the narrow aisle of the plane, Zoe was amazed by how many people could fit in such a small space. "Row 23. Seats A through D," David announced, checking their boarding passes one more time. "Kevin, you get the window seat since you've never flown before." Kevin's eyes lit up as he slid into the seat next to the small oval window. "This is so cool. I can see the whole airport from here." Michelle settled into the aisle seat while David and Zoe took the middle seats. The plane was filling up quickly, and Michelle noticed what a diverse group of travelers they were flying with. There were families with small children, business people in suits, college students with backpacks, and elderly couples who looked like they might be going on vacation. As they waited for takeoff, Zoe started telling her family about something funny that had happened at school the week before. She was naturally animated when she spoke, using her hands to gesture and making voices for different people in her story. Soon, all 4 family members were laughing at her impression of their strict math teacher, trying to use slang to connect with the students. And then Mr. Peterson said, "That's totally fire, kids." And everyone just stared at him, Zoe continued, making her voice sound older and more formal. He had no idea that nobody says that anymore. Kevin was practically in tears from laughing so hard. "Did he really say fire? That's so embarrassing." "The worst part was when he tried to dab afterward," Zoe added, demonstrating the gesture. "I felt so bad for him, but it was also the funniest thing I've ever seen." Michelle couldn't help but giggle at her daughter's story. You know, teachers are just trying to connect with you kids. Maybe you should help him out with some more current slang. Are you kidding? This is way too entertaining, Zoe replied with a grin. The conversation continued as the plane prepared for takeoff. David talked about how nervous he'd been during his first business flight years ago, and Michelle shared stories about the school trip she'd chaperoned. The family's laughter was genuine and warm, the kind that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Kevin pressed his face against the window, watching the ground crew wave goodbye to the aircraft. This is actually happening, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. What's actually happening? Michelle asked, reaching over to squeeze his hand. We're really going to California. We're really going to see Grandma and Uncle Tony. And everyone? It feels like we've been talking about this trip forever. David felt a warm feeling in his chest as he watched his son's excitement. Working long hours and dealing with tight finances had been worth it to see this moment. It's going to be an amazing week, buddy. Grandma has been cooking for 3 days straight, getting ready for us. I hope she makes her famous sweet potato pie, Zoe said, settling back into her seat as the plane's engines grew louder. Oh, she definitely will. She asked me specifically what everyone's favorite dessert was, Michelle replied. She's making something special for each of you kids. The plane was now moving faster, and Kevin watched in amazement as the buildings outside got smaller and smaller. We're actually flying. This is incredible. His excitement was contagious, and soon the whole family was looking out the window, watching Atlanta disappear below them. Other passengers around them were smiling at the family's obvious joy and enthusiasm. It was clear that this was a special trip for them, and their happiness was the kind that makes other people feel good too. As they reached cruising altitude, the family settled in for the 4-hour flight to Los Angeles. They had brought books, games, and snacks, but mostly they were just enjoying being together without the usual distractions of work, school, and daily responsibilities. You know what the best part of this trip is going to be? David said, looking at his wife and children. What? They all asked at the same time. Just this. All of us together, making memories. Everything else is just bonus. Michelle reached over and took his hand. I love you, she said simply. Love you too, he replied, and in that moment everything felt perfect. The plane was carrying them toward a week of family celebration, and nothing could dampen their spirits. Little did they know that their peaceful flight was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything. The plane had been in the air for about 20 minutes when the seatbelt sign finally turned off. Kevin was still glued to the window, watching the clouds drift by like cotton balls scattered across a blue blanket. The Williams family had settled into a comfortable rhythm of conversation, the kind that flows naturally when people are relaxed and happy. Flight attendant Rebecca Turner was working her way through the cabin, checking on passengers and preparing for the beverage service. She'd been flying for 15 years, and today had already been longer than usual. Her morning flight from Dallas had been delayed by 2 hours due to weather, which meant she'd missed her scheduled break between flights. The passengers on that earlier flight had been particularly demanding, complaining about everything from the temperature to the snack selection. Rebecca prided herself on maintaining professional standards, but some days tested her patience more than others. As she walked through the aisles, she could hear various conversations happening around her. Business travelers were talking on their phones, families were chatting about their vacation plans, and college students were sharing stories about their semester break. Back in row 23, Zoe was in the middle of telling another story about her drama class. She'd gotten the lead role in the school play, and rehearsals had been full of funny moments and mishaps. So there I was, supposed to make this grand entrance, Zoe said, using her hands to paint the picture. I'm wearing this huge dress that the costume department made, and I'm supposed to walk down these stairs looking all elegant and royal. Kevin was already starting to smile, knowing his sister well enough to guess where this story was going. But nobody told me that the stairs were going to be slippery because they'd just mopped the stage floor, Zoe continued. So I take my first step, trying to look all graceful, and my foot just slides right out from under me. Michelle covered her mouth, trying not to laugh too loudly. Oh no, what happened? I grabbed onto the railing, but that just made it worse. I basically slid down the entire staircase on my side, still trying to maintain my royal composure, Zoe said, demonstrating, with exaggerated gestures. The whole audience just watched this princess tumble down the stairs like a sack of potatoes. David was chuckling quietly, shaking his head. Please tell me someone got that on video. Oh, they did. And of course someone posted it online with a caption, "When you try to be fancy, but gravity has other plans," Zoe replied, rolling her eyes. I became a meme at school for like 2 weeks. Kevin was laughing so hard he was barely making any sound, just silently shaking in his seat. That's the best thing I've ever heard. I can't believe you didn't tell us about this before. I was too embarrassed. But now I think it's pretty funny, Zoe said. Even the drama teacher couldn't keep a straight face. She had to pause the whole rehearsal because everyone was laughing too hard to continue. The family's laughter was genuine and infectious. A few passengers in nearby seats were smiling at their obvious joy, and an elderly woman across the aisle even chuckled at Zoe's animated storytelling. Rebecca was making her way toward their section when she heard the burst of laughter. She looked over and saw the Williams family, all 4 of them clearly enjoying themselves. Her jaw tightened slightly. She'd been dealing with noise complaints and disruptive passengers all week, and the sound of their conversation seemed louder than it probably was. And the best part, Zoe continued, was that I had to do the whole scene over again. But this time I was so nervous about falling that I walked down the stairs like I was 80 years old. Like this? Kevin asked, getting up slightly in his seat and doing an exaggerated old person walk. Exactly like that, Zoe said, dissolving into giggles again. Michelle was trying to keep her laughter quiet, but it was difficult. Honey, you should have seen your face when you were telling that story. You were so animated. I get that from Dad, Zoe said, pointing at David. Remember when he told us about his first day at the new job? David held up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, that's a great story. My new boss asked me to organize the supply closet, and I thought I was being so efficient. Tell Kevin the part about the boxes, Michelle encouraged, still smiling. Okay, so I'm stacking these boxes of paper, trying to make everything look neat and organized, David began. But I didn't realize that the shelf I was putting them on was one of those adjustable ones that wasn't properly locked in place. Kevin was already anticipating another funny ending. What happened? Well, I put the last box on the top shelf, feeling pretty proud of myself when the whole thing just collapsed. Hundreds of sheets of paper went flying everywhere, like it was snowing indoors, David said, spreading his arms wide. My boss walked in right at that moment, and I'm standing there covered in paper, looking like I'd been hit by a paper tornado. The family was laughing again, and Rebecca's expression was growing more stern. She approached their row, her smile forced and tight. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying an edge that cut through their conversation. I need to ask you to keep your voices down. This is a public space and other passengers are trying to rest. The family immediately stopped talking and looked up at her. David's smile faded as he processed her tone. Oh, of course. We're sorry, Michelle said quickly, always the first to apologize when someone seemed upset. We didn't realize we were being too loud. Rebecca's eyes swept over the family, and her expression remained stern. Flying can be stressful for everyone, and it's important that we all consider other passengers' comfort. Absolutely, David nodded, though he glanced around and noticed that other passengers were having conversations at similar volume levels. We'll keep it down. Kevin looked confused and a little hurt. He'd been having such a good time listening to his family's stories, and now he felt like they'd done something wrong. Thank you, Rebecca said curtly before moving on to the next row, where a business traveler was having a phone conversation that was noticeably louder than the Williams family had been. The family sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. The joy that had been filling their row just minutes before had been replaced by an awkward tension. Were we really being too loud? Zoe whispered to her mother. Michelle looked around the cabin, noticing that other families were still chatting normally. I don't think so, honey, but let's just talk more quietly, okay? David felt a knot forming in his stomach. Something about the flight attendant's approach had felt off, but he didn't want to cause any trouble, especially not on such an important family trip. Maybe we should just read for a while, he suggested, pulling out the book he'd brought for the flight. But Kevin was still confused. Dad, that lady on the phone over there is talking way louder than we were. Why didn't she say anything to her? David had noticed the same thing, but he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Sometimes people just have different standards. Son, let's just focus on having a good trip. The family tried to return to their previous mood, but something had shifted. The easy laughter and natural conversation felt strained now, like they were walking on eggshells. About 10 minutes later, Zoe quietly asked her dad a question about their plans for the next day. She kept her voice low, barely above a whisper. What time did Uncle Tony say he'd pick us up from the hotel? David was about to answer when he saw Rebecca walking back toward their section, her eyes fixed on their row with an expression that seemed to be looking for trouble. The family didn't know it yet, but their peaceful flight was about to become something much more serious. The Williams family sat quietly in their seats, trying to follow the flight attendant's instructions. The easy joy from earlier had been replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to hover over their row like a dark cloud. Kevin kept glancing at his parents, trying to understand why they'd been singled out when other passengers around them were talking just as loudly. Michelle pulled out her tablet and opened a book, hoping to distract herself from the awkward encounter. She'd always been the type of person who avoided conflict, and the flight attendant's stern tone had left her feeling anxious. David was looking through the airplane magazine, but his mind kept replaying the interaction, trying to figure out what they'd done wrong. Mom, Zoe whispered, leaning closer to Michelle, can I ask you something about the hotel? Michelle nodded, and Zoe quietly asked about their room arrangements. Their conversation was barely audible, much quieter than the business traveler 2 rows ahead who was still talking on his phone about quarterly reports. Rebecca was in the galley, preparing drink carts for the beverage service. She kept glancing toward the Williams family section, and every time she heard even the slightest sound from their direction, her expression grew more irritated. Her shift supervisor had called in sick that morning, which meant she was handling extra responsibilities, and her patience was wearing thin. About 15 minutes had passed when Kevin needed to ask his dad a simple question about their luggage. He leaned over and whispered, Dad, did you pack my Nintendo charger? David was about to answer when he saw Rebecca walking directly toward them again. Her stride was purposeful, and her face showed clear annoyance. I thought I made myself clear about keeping quiet, she said, her voice loud enough that passengers in several nearby rows turned to look. This is your second warning, David felt his stomach drop. They'd been whispering, barely making any sound at all. Ma'am, we were just quietly discussing our luggage. We kept our voices down like you asked. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger. Don't argue with me. I've been watching your section, and you people just can't seem to follow simple instructions. The phrase, you people, hung in the air like a slap. Michelle felt her face flush with embarrassment as she realized that other passengers were now staring at them. An elderly woman across the aisle raised her eyebrows in surprise at the flight attendant's tone. We're really sorry, Michelle said, softly, trying to defuse the situation. We'll be completely quiet for the rest of the flight. But Rebecca wasn't finished. I've been flying for 15 years, and I know disruptive behavior when I see it. Some passengers think they can just do whatever they want up here, but this isn't your living room. Kevin looked like he might cry. He'd never been spoken to like this by an adult, and he couldn't understand why they were being treated this way. Zoe reached over and squeezed his hand, trying to comfort her younger brother. A man in the row behind them cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, but I've been listening to this family, and they've been nothing but quiet and polite, he said. Maybe you should check on some of the other passengers who are actually being loud. Rebecca whirled around to face him. Sir, I don't need passengers telling me how to do my job. Please stay in your seat and mind your own business. But the man, who looked to be in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes, didn't back down. I'm a retired teacher, and I know unfair treatment when I see it. This family has done nothing wrong. More passengers were beginning to pay attention now. A young mother with a toddler in the row ahead turned around, her face showing concern. She'd been listening to the whole interaction, and like others, she could see that something wasn't right. Rebecca's face was flushed with anger, and her voice was getting louder. I've had enough of this. You people need to understand that there are rules on this airplane, and I'm here to enforce them. There was that phrase again, you people. This time, several passengers exchanged knowing looks. David felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm for his family's sake. Ma'am, I think there might be a misunderstanding here, David said carefully. We've been trying to follow your instructions, and we're just trying to enjoy our family trip. Don't give me that innocent act, Rebecca snapped. I've been dealing with people like you all day, and I'm tired of it. You think you can just laugh and carry on like you own the place? The words cut through the cabin like a knife. Now it was impossible to ignore what was really happening. This wasn't about noise levels or airplane etiquette. This was about something much deeper and more troubling. A woman in her 30s sitting across the aisle started recording with her phone. She held it low, trying to be discreet, but she wanted to capture what was happening. Other passengers were also reaching for their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. I want to speak to the captain, David said, his voice steady but firm. This has gone far enough. Rebecca's reaction was explosive. You want to speak to the captain? Are you threatening me now? Her voice had risen to a shout that could be heard throughout the entire cabin. I've been dealing with entitled passengers all day, and I'm sick of it. The cabin fell completely silent except for the hum of the airplane engines. Even the business traveler had ended his phone call and was staring at the scene unfolding before him. Flight attendants from other sections were starting to look toward the commotion, their faces showing concern. Michelle was fighting back tears, not from sadness, but from the humiliation of being treated this way in front of so many people. She'd always taught her children to be respectful to adults in authority, but this situation was teaching them a different lesson entirely. Mom, why is she being so mean to us? Kevin whispered, his young voice breaking slightly, before Michelle could answer. The elderly woman across the aisle stood up. Her name was Dorothy, and she was a retired nurse who'd seen enough unfairness in her 78 years to recognize it immediately. Young lady, she said to Rebecca, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with difficult situations. I've been watching this entire interaction, and your behavior is completely inappropriate. This family has been nothing but polite and respectful. Several other passengers voiced their agreement. She's right, called out a man from a few rows back. I've been listening too, and you're way out of line. Rebecca looked around the cabin, realizing that she'd lost control of the situation. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her behavior. All of you need to mind your own business, she shouted. I'm in charge of this cabin, and I decide what's appropriate behavior, but the damage was done. Multiple passengers were now recording, and the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted completely. What had started as a peaceful family flight had become a public spectacle, with the Williams family at the center of treatment that was clearly unfair and discriminatory. David pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly with controlled anger. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. His brother worked for the airline, and while David had never wanted to use that connection for personal reasons, this situation had gone too far. As he prepared to make the call that would change everything, Rebecca stormed back toward the galley, muttering under her breath about difficult passengers and entitled families. She had no idea that her career was about to take a dramatic turn. The plane continued flying toward Los Angeles, but the Williams family's peaceful vacation had already been shattered. However, sometimes the most difficult moments lead to the most important changes, and this flight was about to prove that point in a way that nobody could have expected. David stared at his phone for a moment, his thumb hovering over his brother's contact. He'd never wanted to use family connections to solve problems, but this situation had crossed every line of decency. His children were watching him, and he knew this was one of those moments that would teach them something important about standing up for what's right. "I need to make a call," he said quietly to Michelle, who nodded with understanding in her eyes. His brother James worked as a senior operations manager at the airline's headquarters in Dallas. They'd grown up together, gone to the same schools, and James had always been the one who fought bullies in the neighborhood. David knew that if anyone would understand what was happening on this flight, it would be James. The phone rang twice before James picked up. "Hey, David, aren't you supposed to be flying to Mom's birthday party right now?" "James, I need you to listen to me very carefully," David said, keeping his voice low but urgent. "We're on Flight 447 from Atlanta to Los Angeles, and we have a serious problem." James could hear the tension in his brother's voice immediately. In all their years together, David had never sounded quite like this. "What's going on?" Your flight attendants just spent the last hour targeting our family for no reason except the color of our skin," David said, the words feeling heavy as he spoke them. "She's been hostile, aggressive, and she's humiliated us in front of the entire cabin." James felt his stomach drop. As someone who worked in airline operations, he knew exactly how serious this kind of allegation was. "Tell me everything, and don't leave out any details." David quickly explained the entire sequence of events, from the first unnecessary warning to Rebecca's shouting match with the passengers who had stood up for them. James listened without interrupting, but David could hear him typing on his keyboard. In the background, "I'm looking at the flight manifest now," James said. Flight 447, crew roster shows Rebecca Turner as the lead flight attendant. "David, I need you to know that what you're describing is completely unacceptable, and we're going to handle this immediately." "James, I don't want any special treatment because you're my brother," David said. "I just want this to stop before it gets worse." "This isn't about special treatment," James replied firmly. "This is about passenger safety and basic human dignity." "Hold on, I'm conferencing in the Flight Operations Center." Within seconds, James had connected with the airline's Flight Operations Center, where supervisors monitor all flights in real time. The supervisor on duty was a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the airline for over 20 years. "Patricia, this is James Williams in operations. I have a Code 7 passenger discrimination incident on Flight 447. We need to contact the captain immediately." Patricia's tone became serious instantly. "I'll get Captain Rodriguez on the line right now. What's the nature of the incident?" James briefly explained the situation while David waited on the line, listening to his brother handle the crisis with professional efficiency. Around him, other passengers were still glancing their way, some offering supportive smiles while others looked uncomfortable with the tension that had filled the cabin. "David, stay on the line," James said. "We're connecting with the captain now." Captain Rodriguez was a veteran pilot with over 15 years of experience. He'd been flying commercial aircraft long enough to know that passenger incidents could escalate quickly if not handled properly. When the call came through from operations, he was reviewing weather reports for their approach into Los Angeles. "Captain Rodriguez here," he answered through his headset. "Captain, this is Patricia from Operations. We have a serious passenger discrimination incident involving one of your flight attendants. A passenger is alleging targeted harassment based on race." The captain's expression immediately became grave. "Which crew member?" "Rebecca Turner." "The passenger's family has been documenting the incident, and according to the report, other passengers have witnessed the behavior and are supporting the family's account." Captain Rodriguez looked toward the cabin door, knowing that he needed to investigate this immediately. "I'm going to assess the situation personally. Keep this line open." The captain activated the autopilot and left the cockpit, walking into the cabin where he could immediately sense the tension. Several passengers looked up at him with expressions of relief, hoping that someone in authority would finally address what they'd witnessed. He walked directly to Dorothy, the elderly woman who had spoken up for the Williams family. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Rodriguez." I understand there's been an incident involving one of my crew members and another passenger. Can you tell me what you witnessed?" Dorothy's eyes lit up with determination. "Captain, I've been flying for 50 years, and I've never seen a flight attendant treat passengers the way that woman treated this family. She was hostile, discriminatory, and completely unprofessional." The captain nodded and looked around at other passengers. "Did anyone else witness this incident?" Several hands went up around the cabin. The business traveler who'd been on his phone said, "I recorded part of it on my phone." The flight attendant was clearly targeting this family for no legitimate reason. The young mother with the toddler added, "I was shocked by her behavior. This family was just having a normal conversation, and she escalated into something horrible." "Captain." Rodriguez thanked the passengers and then walked over to the Williams family. David had just finished his call with James and was putting his phone away. "Mr. Williams, I'm Captain Rodriguez. I've been briefed on the situation by our operations center. I want to apologize on behalf of the airline for what you and your family have experienced today." Michelle looked up at the captain with tears in her eyes. "We were just trying to have a nice family trip. We weren't doing anything wrong." "I understand completely, and I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously," the captain said. "I'm going to speak with the flight attendant now, and then I'll be back to discuss our next steps." Captain Rodriguez walked toward the galley where Rebecca was preparing for the beverage service, apparently trying to act as if nothing had happened. When she saw the captain approaching, her face went pale. "Rebecca, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his tone professional but firm. They moved to a small area behind the galley where they could talk without being overheard. "I've received multiple reports about an incident involving you and the Williams family in row 23. I need to hear your side of the story." Rebecca immediately became defensive. "Captain, those passengers were being disruptive and wouldn't follow instructions. I was just trying to maintain order in the cabin." "Rebecca, I've spoken with several other passengers who witnessed the entire incident. Their accounts don't match what you're telling me. They're saying you specifically targeted this family while ignoring other passengers who were being much louder." "That's not true," Rebecca insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "I treat all passengers the same." Captain Rodriguez studied her face carefully. "Rebecca, I'm going to be direct with you. Multiple passengers have recorded portions of this incident. Your behavior toward the Williams family appears to have been discriminatory and unprofessional. This is a serious matter that's going to require immediate action." Rebecca's face went completely white as she realized the implications of what the captain was saying. "Captain, I was just having a difficult day. I didn't mean—" "Rebecca, the safety and comfort of our passengers is our top priority. Based on what I've learned about this incident, I'm making the decision to remove you from duty for the remainder of this flight." The captain walked back to the cockpit and contacted the operations center. "Patricia, based on my investigation, I'm confirming the discrimination incident. I'm removing the flight attendant from duty, and I'm requesting permission to make an emergency landing to address this situation properly." Back in Dallas, James was still monitoring the situation when he received the update. He immediately called David back. "David, the captain has confirmed everything you told me. They're taking immediate action." David felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What kind of action? "The flight attendant has been removed from duty, and the captain is requesting an emergency landing to handle this situation properly." "David, I want you to know that what happened to your family today goes against everything our airline stands for." As David hung up the phone, he saw Captain Rodriguez walking back toward their row. The entire cabin seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom, "this is your captain speaking. We will be making an unscheduled landing in Dallas due to a crew situation. We apologize for any inconvenience and will provide updates as we begin our descent." The Williams family looked at each other in amazement. Their phone call had just changed the course of the entire flight. The plane began its descent toward Dallas, and you could feel the tension throughout the cabin. Some passengers were confused about the sudden change in plans. while others who had witnessed the incident sat quietly, understanding the gravity of what had just happened. The Williams family remained in their seats, still processing that their simple phone call had resulted in an entire airplane being diverted. Kevin pressed his face against the window, watching the ground get closer. "Dad, are we really landing?" "Because of what happened to us." David put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes, Kevin, when something really wrong happens, it takes big actions to make it right. The airline is showing that they take this seriously." Michelle was looking around the cabin, noticing how many passengers were now offering them supportive smiles and nods. What had started as an embarrassing and humiliating experience was turning into something entirely different. People who had been strangers an hour ago were now united in their disapproval of what they had witnessed. As the plane touched down at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed in Dallas. Please remain seated while we handle a crew situation. We will have you back in the air and on your way to Los Angeles as soon as possible." Within minutes of the plane arriving at the gate, there was movement at the front of the aircraft. Airport security officers boarded, followed by several people in airline uniforms who looked like supervisors. Rebecca gathered her things from the galley area, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear about what would happen next. As she walked down the aisle toward the exit, several passengers watched her go. The elderly woman, Dorothy, looked directly at her and shook her head disapprovingly. The business traveler who had recorded part of the incident held up his phone slightly, as if to remind her that her behavior had been documented. Rebecca avoided eye contact with everyone, especially the Williams family. As she passed their row, Zoe looked up at her with a mixture of hurt and confusion. She was only 16, and this was her first real experience with discrimination. The look on the teenager's face seemed to hit Rebecca harder than anything else. That had happened after Rebecca left the plane. One of the airline supervisors approached the Williams family. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put them at ease. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, I'm Jennifer Martinez, the customer service manager for this region. I want to personally apologize for what you and your children experienced today. This behavior is absolutely not acceptable, and it does not represent the values of our airline." David stood up to shake her hand. "We appreciate you taking this seriously. Our kids didn't deserve to be treated that way." "You're absolutely right, and we're going to make sure this never happens again," Jennifer said. "First, I want you to know that the flight attendant in question has been immediately suspended pending a full investigation. Second, we're upgrading your family to first class for the remainder of your journey to Los Angeles." Zoe's eyes widened. She'd never flown first class before, and despite everything that had happened, she couldn't help but feel a little excited. "Additionally," Jennifer continued, "we're providing full compensation for this flight, and we'd like to offer your family complimentary round-trip tickets for a future vacation. We hope you'll give us another chance to show you the kind of service our passengers deserve." Michelle felt tears forming in her eyes, but these were different tears than before. "Thank you. We really appreciate how you've handled this." "There's one more thing," Jennifer said. "Several passengers have asked to speak with you before we continue the flight. They wanted to make sure you knew that they supported you and were proud of how you handled the situation." Over the next few minutes, passenger after passenger approached. The Williams family, Dorothy, the elderly woman, was first. "I've been flying since the 1960s, she said, taking Michelle's hand. "I've seen discrimination in many forms, and I want you to know that what I witnessed today was completely unacceptable. But I'm proud of how you maintained your dignity throughout the whole ordeal." The business traveler introduced himself as Robert and showed David the video he had recorded. "I'm sending this to my lawyer friends and posting it on social media. People need to see what happened here and how the airline handled it properly." The young mother with the toddler approached with her little girl. "I wanted my daughter to meet your family," she said. "I want her to see what courage and grace look like when people are treated unfairly." One by one, passengers came forward to offer their support. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others simply wanted to express their admiration for how the family had handled such a difficult situation. Kevin was amazed by the response. "Mom, why are all these people being so nice to us?" "Because, sweetheart, most people believe in treating others fairly," Michelle explained. "When they see something wrong happening, good people want to make it right." As the plane prepared for takeoff again, the Williams family was escorted to their new first-class seats. The flight attendants in this section were professional-friendly and went out of their way to make sure the family felt comfortable and welcome. Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement as they prepared to leave Dallas. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience during our unscheduled stop. I also want to say that today you witnessed how a community of travelers can come together to support what's right. That gives me hope for the future of air travel and humanity in general." The flight to Los Angeles was peaceful and comfortable. The family was able to relax for the first time in hours, and they even found themselves laughing again as they shared the spacious first-class seats and enjoyed the upgraded meal service. As they flew over the desert landscape approaching California, David reflected on what had happened. This wasn't how I expected our trip to start," he said to his family. "But maybe it needed to happen," Michelle replied thoughtfully. "Maybe this will prevent other families from going through the same thing." Zoe was looking out the window at the mountains below. "I learned something today. Standing up for yourself isn't always easy, but it's important. And there are more good people in the world than bad ones." When they finally landed in Los Angeles, there was one more surprise waiting for them. James, David's brother, was standing at the gate along with two other airline executives. "I flew down from Dallas to meet you," James said, hugging his brother tightly. "I wanted to make sure you knew how seriously we took this situation." The airline executives apologized once more and informed the family that Rebecca had been terminated from her position. They also announced that the incident would be used as a training case for all airline employees to help prevent similar situations in the future. 3 days later, videos of the incident and the airline's response had spread across social media. Rather than being embarrassed by the negative publicity, the airline received praise for how quickly and decisively they had handled the discrimination. At Grandma Williams' birthday party that weekend, the family shared their story with relatives who couldn't believe what had happened. But they also talked about the positive response from fellow passengers and the airline's commitment to making things right. Kevin, who had been so confused and hurt by Rebecca's treatment, seemed to understand something important now. "Grandma, even when bad things happen, good people can make them better." Grandma Williams hugged her grandson tightly. "That's right, baby. And you come from a family of good people who know how to stand up for what's right." The trip ended up being even more meaningful than they had originally planned. It wasn't just a family reunion anymore. It was a reminder that justice, dignity, and human decency are worth fighting for, and that sometimes one phone call can change everything. Years later, the Williams family would still talk about their flight to Los Angeles, not as a story of discrimination, but as a story of how ordinary people can make extraordinary changes when they refuse to accept injustice.